Welcome back to the show. Well, influencer and men's rights activist Andrew Tate boasts millions of followers online. In his controversial videos, they promote sexist and misogynist ideologies, and these videos have garnered billions of views. While he's now in custody facing human trafficking charges, his popularity speaks to a wider issue around the radicalization of young men.
So to speak more about this rising concern, we have David O'Brien here with us. He's been working in youth mental health for 30 years, and he's the director of Estimated Time of Arrival, an organization that works with radicalized youth here in Toronto. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. And David, the radicalized youth that you work with, they tend to be boys and men between the ages of 12 and 35. Yep. And the thing is, curiosity can be a good thing, a logical part of any young person's sort of personal life. So at what point do these thoughts become dangerously radical?
So just before we get there, just to clarify that what we're dealing with here is online ideologies related to Daesh, also known as ISIS, white supremacy, other types of hate groups. There's like 150 of them in Canada. So basically, the process of radicalization is someone that's involved with these groups and these communities, really, because they're communities that are obsessed with them. So their whole life revolves around it. So, you know, there's no other room for any other opinion or a viewpoint on a situation. Also, there's violence attached. Mm-hmm. So not necessarily because you're radicalized to these ideologies that you're going to commit a violent attack, but certainly on the pathway. But also that, you know, there's a sense of belonging, a sense of interconnectedness to these groups. And basically, your whole life revolves around, which means you disengage with work, with school, volunteerism, playing sports, and it becomes your life.
So do you see certain commonalities among the youth that you work with? Like, is there kind of a stereotypical profile that you could sketch out of a radicalized young person? Yeah,
I wouldn't say that. It's actually very complex, and that's why we're in the position in Canada that we are today. We're learning about this. But there is some common themes that we've developed or seen at our ETA program. So one thing in particular is that, you know, we do live in a violent culture sometimes. Mm-hmm. And so we're all kind of born into that as a baseline, and especially for men in particular who have no real sort of, you know, when I saw the word activism today, we don't really have that outlet. So really, these online spaces provide that dark outlet, unfortunately, because it's the only place available. So there's that piece, but there's also individual factors. So a lot of the folks we work with have anxiety, issues with depression, and in particular with men and young boys, it can manifest in violence and anger. And also, the majority of our young men, unfortunately, have been exposed to domestic violence and previous violence against women. So growing up in homes where misogyny was the norm in some respects. So those two combine, and then it's accessing or engaging with the online content, which is promoting, and which many of the youth that are in these online communities talk about their mental health and not being able to access supports or feeling like they've been pushed away by healthcare organizations and even their families sometimes.
Wow. Yeah. Well, when people think of radicalized youth, they might have this image of perhaps a young man sitting in his basement alone on his computer. Is that what's actually happening? Is that kind of isolation almost always the case?
Surprisingly, not necessarily. I think when we look at the research and data coming out of some of the attacks across this country and even in the United States, that some of these young people were engaged with regular communities or mainstream communities, going to university, going to college, going to high school. They were socially participating, but not necessarily socially engaged. They're two different things. So they're feeling out of place within the context of their social networks. And so, you know, when we look at even some of the young people that left to go to Syria to fight for Daesh and ISIS back in early 2016 from Canada, some of them were university students. So feeling disconnected with their communities, you know, within the context of wherever they're living in Canada, but really kind of disconnected socially in an interpersonal way.
What's next is probably going to be shocking for a lot of people to hear, but I think it's very important, which is that you say that Canada is a, quote, huge exporter of hate. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so there was a research study done by an organization in the UK called an Institute for Strategic Dialogue in 2020, so just at the beginning of the pandemic. And it indicated that Canadians across this country, from coast to coast, we're engaging in hate content in over 6,000 channels. Not only just engaging with it, but also creating it, so putting content out there. So this isn't just a problem that is manifested from Europe and moving to Canada or the United States, but we are at the center of this.
I mean, I feel like that needs to be unpacked. Like, why do you think that is?
I think Canada, there's a lot of remote communities in Canada. There's a lot of marginalized populations that don't necessarily access services or have access to the supports they may need. So the isolation, we're a huge country,
right?
Most of the people live on the U.S. border and just maybe a little bit north of that. So we have a lot of remote communities where people are struggling.
I want to get to this, you know, whether it is misogyny like somebody promoted by somebody like Andrew Tate or, you know, other kinds of hateful views. A lot of us, you know, if we have someone in our life or we hear about this, we want to attack the ideology.
Yeah.
And you say when you start talking to these young men, that is actually the wrong place to start. Why is that wrong? And what is the right approach?
Because they're taught in these online communities that someone that's attacking your ideology, they're wrong. They're into a conspiracy themselves, and we're right. And so the first line of defense is to fight other people's ideology. So when we work with a young person, we put that to the side. That sounds strange, but we do. And we look at what's their strengths, skills, and resources? Who are they outside of that ideology? Because, you know, even though it's all consuming, there's other parts of this person that we want to grow and flourish so that we build this parallel life so that they can move away from these hate communities into a life that's, you know, about school, volunteerism, counselor, or, you know, proper mental health or good mental health.
We are just scratching the surface on this fascinating topic. Thank you so much for the work that you and your teams are doing, and for joining us today. Thank you.
Hey there, wasn't that great? Do you know where you can find some equally good content? Our YouTube page. It's filled with discussions, debates, and some laughs. Head there now, like and subscribe.